welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-Jung Cho. President Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Kishida announced efforts to increase military cooperation, including joint development of military equipment. The two leaders also indicated they're ready to hold dialogue with North Korea. Today, we discuss how the US-Japan summit affects the Korean Peninsula.
Modernizing command and control structures. This is the most significant upgrade in our alliance since it was first established.
日朝間の実りある関係を樹立するということは、日朝双方の利益に合致するとともに、
In the studio with me, Mr. Richard Lawless, founding principal of NMV Consulting. Mr. Lawless was former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs and also served as Deputy Head of the U.S. delegation to the Beijing Six-Party Talks. Mr. Lawless has also spent 15 years as a clandestine services officer in the Central Intelligence Agency, where he specialized in nuclear proliferation issues. His recently published book, Hunting Nukes, addresses both South Korea and North Korea's nuclear programs. Also joining us, Mr. Sidney Seiler, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Seiler was former National Intelligence Officer for North Korea on the National Intelligence Council until July of last year. Mr. Seiler was the Special Envoy for Six-Party Talks and National Security Council Korea Director during the Obama administration. Mr. Seiler also served as a Senior Analyst for U.S. Forces Korea. Mr. Seiler has worked on North Korea issues for over 40 years. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Now, Mr. Lawless, after a summit with Prime Minister Kishida, President Biden said that the two countries are modernizing the command and control structure and elevating the interoperability and the planning of the militaries. And President Biden also said that this is the most significant elevation since the alliance began. Now, how will the already strong US-Japan alliance change specifically?
Well, I think to go back and look at what Mr. Biden said and how he characterized it, we have an opportunity here to operationalize the U.S.-Japan relationship that we've never had before. As a matter of fact, if we follow through, and that's going to be the issue before us as we approach the ministerial level 2+2 talks, if we're able to operationalize what's been decided in this senior level agreement, we will have advanced the alliance to a very high level. What most people do not appreciate is the fact that actually our alliance with Korea has been much more operationalized. It's much deeper in terms of our ability to interact real time. So it's time for the US-Japan relationship to catch up to where that relationship is in Japan and be fully operationalized. We've got about 6 to 9 months to do that. So the decisions that are pending now in the coming months as to how we make that happen are going to be critical.
So, Mr. Seiler, what Mr. Lawless just talked about, will it primarily be a catch-up to US-ROK alliance, or will US-Japan alliance be elevated to even higher level than US-ROK alliance?
Well, I like what Richard said in terms of the fact that this will really elevate the capabilities and integrate our command and control communications with our Japanese friends and colleagues. But the fact that it has taken this long is not because it's been neglected, but because that was the type of relationship that the U.S. and Japan had on the ground and between U.S. forces, Japan, and their Japanese counterparts. Whereas in Korea, it's been 70 years of armistice, ready to fight tonight, and a combined forces command that regularly exercises so that we have some combined mechanisms in place. We know we have a war plan, and we know how to execute that plan and the various connecting tissues there. So I think it's almost apples and oranges to compare the two, and it would be even worse to say one's better than the other or one's catching up to the other. But clearly, the operationalization aspect of what Richard mentioned is what's most encouraging in this development, U.S.-Japan relationship.
Mr. Lawless, President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida declared an era of alliance projection, ending the era of alliance protection. Now, does this open the door for Japan's self-defense forces, previously limited by the exclusively defense-oriented policy? Does this open the door for that force to become a force that can fight wars if necessary?
I think so. But we have to be careful with this terminology, projection. Part of this simply means that we're taking something that was traditionally a situation where Japan, quote, provided the shield and the United States supposedly provided the sword. What we're now realizing is, and the Japanese have realized this and come to realize it, both in the North Korean and the China context, and in the Taiwan situation, they don't have the option anymore of just being the shield. They have to be part of the sword. If you're going to be part of the sword, you have to be able to operate real-time operationally with integrated command structures. They've done their part by now creating a combined forces command at their Ministry of Defense level. The key for us is to make sure we're integrated into that so that we can make decisions real time. Mm-hmm. Again, not projection in the sense of going to Southeast Asia per se, but projection in the sense of becoming one with us, able to conduct operations real time together.
So, Mr. Lawless, South Korea has this past historical issues with Japan when Japan pursued militarism. Now that Japan is again seeking defense buildup, how would that be able to balance the Japan-US relationship and Japan-South Korea relationship and Korea-US relationship?
It's a great point. You brought that up before. We talked about it. There's an opportunity now for the Japanese and the Koreans to be much more integrated, and they should be. This should have happened before, but as Sid said, the politics weren't there. The political construct is there, the threat is there. China reminds us of every day. The North Koreans don't miss any opportunity to remind us of it. So the way to reassure the Republic of Korea, and it's out there, the Japanese are willing, the way to reassure the Republic of Korea is to have a deeper integration between the Koreans and the Japanese today. We're not there yet.
Right. I think there's a natural response to national security threats that when you sit down and talk about, a country will move in that direction. I'm specifically thinking of the legacy concerns over the militarization of Japan in the face of North Korea with a large number of nuclear weapons openly threatened to subjugate South Korea, as well as China and the risk it poses to the region. And so I think this is not a progressive versus conservative issue, although there are differences of opinion on or aligning with the U.S. on how an orientation towards China and the prospects for Korea-Japan cooperation going forward amidst Japanese militarization. But these are all manageable when we can sit down and closely talk about the emerging threats and how we respond to them.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Seiler, the United States and Japan are establishing a military-industrial council, a new area of cooperation. Now, United States is an absolute defense powerhouse. Why would the United States be interested in pursuing such cooperation with Japan? And will the U.S. in the future be interested in pursuing similar cooperation with South Korea?
Well, I think the key with Japan is tapping their very unique capabilities, their advanced state-of-the-art expertise across various technologies that have direct applicability to modern warfare, and they're will be critical to enhancing both U.S. and Japanese military capabilities. And the DICUS, this Defense Industrial Cooperation Acquisition and Sustainment grouping will enable us to help expedite the pace at which this, because it's a very different approach for Japan in terms of leveraging its domestic technologies in a way to enhance military capabilities on such short notice. I think we have a long experience working together with the Koreans in these areas. And again, the DICUS has, I think, a unique application to Japan and US-Japan military technical cooperation that is already existing in different forms on the Korea side.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Seiler, in reality, Japan and South Korea's approach to China may not completely align with that of the United States, and that's why South Korea and Japan are seeking summit with China to find a balance. Now, United States said that it does not disregard the special relationship that Japan and South Korea have with China, but do you think there's a red line in terms of Japan, South Korea, China cooperation that if you cross that red line can hurt U.S. interests?
I think it's never helpful to establish red lines. I think there are areas where we need to be concerned, particularly in economic security, supply chain, other areas where near-term economic benefits blind us to the longer-term strategic implications for the type of relationship and interactions that we, the United States, Korea, Japan, any country, have in dealing with China. And I think what's happened over the past several years, in large part because of China's own actions, it's galvanized cooperation of like-minded countries. This is not about building military blocks and to contain China. This is about shaping Chinese behavior in a way that results in a more peaceful, rules-driven order in throughout the Indo-Pacific. So in that regard, the differences of opinion reflect differences of national interest, differences of commercial interest, but I don't think they're 90-degree, off direction differences of opinion. These are all areas that, through close cooperation, as we've proven, in particular, working with South Korea on semiconductors and other areas, these are all areas that can be addressed, and a combined approach towards China can have much greater impact than if we try to work. We let China work each of us one-on-one.
Just a few years ago, when high-level South Korean officials said South Korea can choose which country to cooperate with, U.S. government sternly said that South Korea already made that decision when South Korea formed alliance with United States.
Well, that's fair, and I think it even goes beyond that. The rules-based order, the values, and the principles that underlie the international liberal world order are appealing to countries, liberal democracies, who have a respect for economic freedom, political freedom, a respect for human rights. Naturally, there really is no choice, as it were, in terms of there's not moral equivalence here. And so, Korea over the years, it has a reliance on us for the security cooperation and its defense. And we also have shared values, I think, that will always make the U.S. the ally of preference for the people of the Republic of Korea.
Mr. Lawless, you emphasized the importance of integrating South Korea into this elevated security alliance with United States and Japan. Now, some of the South Korean governments have been playing in the middle between United States and China. And there were some times when Seoul was not on the same page with Washington and Japan on North Korea issues. Do you think deep down, United States has a different level of expectation, different level of trust when it comes to partnering with Japan or South Korea?
Yes and no. The fact is, reality is set in most cases, I think, in the political construct of South Korea. Reality is that if there is aggression from North Korea, Japan is going to be involved not from the first day, but from the first hour. We will have to project power from Japan to resolve any crisis in Korea, and that is the reality of the day. And what the North Koreans have done, in case somebody in South Korea wasn't listening, they've made it very clear that they consider the Republic of Korea to be an obstacle to them, an enemy, if you will, of first class. They've removed any doubt. So if anybody has any misunderstanding about this, they should not. But the key point is Japan has always been critical to the defense of the Republic of Korea. It always will be. And so we need to integrate, as we improve the US-Japan relationship, we need to have a companion integration, if you will, to some degree, with the Republic of Korea. That should be our goal, near-term goal.
And then I would also add, analytically speaking, I remain convinced that on all these important issues, inter-Korean relations, the abductee issue, North Korea human rights, and denuclearization, that there's limits to progress that can be made in any one area without the other three. Because in North Korea, that's made the strategic decision to get serious about abductees, is also probably looking to restart dialogue with South Korea, is probably also looking at what it can take in the international arena to address the human rights concerns, and would come back to the denuclearization table. A North Korea that has not made that decision is likely pursuing one or more of these avenues as a distraction or a temporary concession generator, and is unlikely to be serious about the talks about which we're talking.
So I want to come back to that abductee issue soon. Mr. Lawless, thanks to China, the lattice-like U.S. alliance network in Asia has been strengthened, including Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, India, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, there is a skepticism that should there be a second Trump administration, which is considered transactional, such alliance network may be weakened. Do you agree?
Not necessarily. Sid and I were just talking about this. As a matter of fact, it's almost a rule of thumb. It should be for people trying to anticipate what President Trump will do. You cannot anticipate that with any degree of confidence. He'll make his decision when he makes it, and I think he could very well give us the right decision at the right time. We were talking about what happened in Hanoi with dear Mr. Kim. What we put on the table, or what was put on the table for discussion, was completely reasonable. The North Koreans trashed that meeting, if you excuse the expression, and were unmoved by any ability to compromise or to negotiate properly. Trump correctly saw the deal was a lousy deal for not only the United States, but for the Republic of Korea, and stood up, politely left the table. And that's the way we have to be with the North Koreans.
Mr. Seiler, President Trump in his first presidency sought burden sharing from South Korea, but him asking South Korea to share more burden, is that another way of proving that actually the United States wants South Korea as an alliance?
I think that's a fair way of putting it. You know, the alliance with the Republic of Korea and any U.S. security commitment abroad needs to some degree to be justified to the American people. There needs to be a context. Us foreign policy elites that sit in, the national security experts who sit and talk about it, we all come to the table with an understanding of the value of alliances, global threats, cooperating with like-minded partners, multilateral diplomacy. It all comes very natural to us. You have average American citizen saying, why is it in U.S. interest to have 28,500 troops on the Korean Peninsula? And there's nothing wrong with us being ready to give an answer to that. And you're exactly right. The fact that the president was interested, it was a very unorthodox and it was not an easy negotiation, but it did address an issue that was important to President Trump and Americans who support his view of international affairs.
Now I want to move on to the mention of North Korea during the Kishida-Biden summit. Now, Mr. Seiler, regarding Prime Minister Kishida's initiation of dialogue with North Korea, President Biden said it's a good thing, it's a positive thing. It was the first nod of approval coming from President Biden regarding Japan-North Korea summit. Now, do you think the summit can happen? Is it still in the cards?
Well, it hasn't died off completely, and Prime Minister Kishida keeps speaking about the fact that ongoing contacts are underway to try to make it happen. Kim Yo-jong in a public statement, as well as Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee, both came out and stated quite clearly that the abductee issue is off the table, and if Tokyo insists it has to be on the table, there's absolutely no interest in such dialogue on DPRK's part. And that's what I would analytically conclude, and that any other forward progress that they might be making is likely designed for some short-term rent-seeking and not really designed to meet the needs of the Japanese people. That said, I agree that President Biden obviously made the right decision in supporting an ally's approach and reinforcing, the central message of this administration, which is the door has always been open to dialogue with North Korea. It's Pyongyang that's refusing to walk through that door.
Now, Mr. Lawless, the Japanese government cites the abduction issue as the main reason why it wants to have summit with North Korea. But given that Japan will be the country most affected by the possible war on the Korean Peninsula, don't you think Japan actually wants to have dialogue on security issues rather than the abduction issue, which is more targeted towards the domestic audience?
I think it's a good question. The fact of the matter is the people that now surround the Prime Minister of Japan, his national security staff, they're all experienced in dealing with North Korea. So there is no false hopes about having any progress with the North Koreans. But the Rachi issue, the so-called abductee issue in Japan, is the concern across the entire political spectrum. So no matter who is holding power in Japan, the Rachi issue has to be raised. It has to be discussed openly. And they have to make a point, whether it's a progressive government or a conservative government, of engaging the North Koreans on the Rachi issue. There is no political out from not doing that. So that's what the Japanese are doing. And as Sid said, President Biden just acknowledged that the Japanese have to do that.
Right.
Mr. Seiler, the U.S. is expressing serious concerns over the Japanese abductee issue, but would the United States really want Japan to only focus on abductee issue if this summit happens? Wouldn't the United States want Japan to also talk about threat reductions or denuclearization if the summit happens?
Well, it's an interesting question because you're talking about how talking points and issues are teed up for discussions among leaders and how you would be able to have any credible discussion with North Korea that didn't address the threat that they pose to Japan, in particular their intermediate-range ballistic missiles, their medium-range ballistic missiles, and the fact that the nuclear threat that they claim to hold over the head of South Korea is the same one they would hold over the head of Japan. In particular, what would be the demand? Deny U.S. use of the bases there that are so critical to our defense of the Republic of Korea. So, that Japan would say that the abductee issue would be the central issue, the main issue, doesn't mean these other issues would be off the table. And I would say that short of, some type of large compensation package, the billions of dollars in reparations that the DPRK asserts, rightfully so, that they did not receive like the South Koreans did in 1965 under the Basic Treaty, that before any of this large amount of reparations would go into North Korea, there would have to be some type of credible progress on threat reduction, because all we'd be doing would be enabling a stronger, qualitatively and quantitatively advanced WMD threat funded by reparations from Japan, and I don't think that's not what Tokyo could consider as possible.
Mr. Lawless, before we go, lastly,
yes.
If the summit happens and North Korea and Japan gets closer, and they even talk about normalization of ties, wouldn't that the kind of development that U.S. would check against? And we've seen that sentiment decades ago.
It's a new time in Asia, and people are much more realistic. They get to the point much faster. I don't feel the slightest possibility that the Japanese would get ahead of us or get out of pace with us or out of step with us on North Korea. So too, the Republic of Korea should not feel in any sense endangered by a Japanese-North Korean dialogue. It will amount to nothing. It will be rent-seeking, as expressed. Right. And everybody's much smarter now. We've all dealt with the North Koreans over multiple generations.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Seiler, Mr. Lawless, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.